You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and gives it light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to God in heaven. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, imagine, if you will, walking into a room with 9 people you have never met. Everyone sits down at a round table, and the purpose of this table is to allow these individuals to describe themselves, to tell who they are. The first time around the table, everyone just says his or her name. Hello, my name's Matthew. And after that, on each turn around the table, each person says one thing to describe themselves, to say something about who they are. I'm married and my wife and I have 4 children. So that turn by turn, statement by statement, these individuals are able to explain and describe who it is they are. So put yourself at that table, knowing that with each turn, you're free to say anything that you want to about yourself, and you're free to withhold anything that you don't want to say. So what would you say about yourself? If you are married, or if you have children or grandchildren, do you think those facts about yourself would tend to come out pretty early? Would you say where you were from, or where you live now? Maybe you say what you do for a living, or where you went to school. You might tell what your hobby is, name your favorite book, your favorite travel destination. What would you say about yourself? What is your identity that you would try to describe to this table of strangers? So play along with me for just a minute. Put yourself at that table. You've said your name. Now think in your mind, what are the first 3 things that you will say in your first 3 terms? What are the first 3 facts about yourself that you will describe to say who you are? So hold those in your mind for just a moment, and let me ask you this, and I'll just ask rhetorically, you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you, in these first 3 terms, identified yourself as a Christian or a disciple? And if you didn't do that, how many turns do you think it would take before you claimed that identity? I will tell you that when I played through this scenario in my own mind, I wanted to do it as honestly as I could. And this seems counterintuitive to that, but to do it honestly, I removed being a student at Bright from who I am. I know that doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to me. Because it seemed like cheating. It seemed like saying I went to Bright was a way of identifying myself as a Christian without intentionally claiming a Christian identity. And I didn't want to do that. So I played through this scenario in my own mind, and I'll tell you, I did not identify myself as a Christian in the first 3 terms. I didn't do it in the first 5 terms. I don't know how many terms it would take me to claim that identity. And as I thought about that, it bothered me. But I think Jesus addresses the issue of identity in the text we have this morning. At the start of chapter 5, the writer of Matthew tells us that Jesus sat down on a mountainside. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He started with what we call the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers. And after that, I think he goes on to tell his disciples something about their identity, because he tells them, you are salt and you are light. Now, you don't have to look very long before you can find many interpretations of this text. One place I looked said that salt is a preservative, and that Christians are to be salt by preserving the world against moral decay and corruption. Another source said that salt is a flavor seasoning used to enhance food, and that Christians are to act like salt by improving the world by obeying God and showing the world how to obey God. Another place said that light is a revealer, and that Christians are to reveal the good and the bad, the right and the wrong way to live. So as I said, there are many interpretations of the text, but as I thought about the text, I thought about salt and light in terms of identity. And if that's the case, then what does salt have to do with identity? Well, let me ask you this. How do you know when you are tasting salt? Or to put it more directly, what does salt taste like? Try to answer that question to yourself without using the word salt or using some derivative. So, salt tastes salty is not an acceptable answer. I tried to answer the question and I couldn't do it. Salt tastes like salt, right? And in fact, salt is one of the 4 basic tastes that we can perceive. And I'll give bonus points if anybody can name the other 3.
Sweet, bitter.
Sweet, bitter, one more? Sour, there you go. Everybody gets bonus points. I think it is interesting, though, that of those 4 basic tastes, salt is the only one for which we have a distinct substance. The taste of salt is kind of like one of the primary colors. It just is. We know salt when we taste it, and oftentimes we know salt when it is absent. When we think we should taste it, but we don't. When we reach for the shaker. But given that, still, what does salt have to do with identity? I think perhaps that the gospel writer is saying that at some basic level, there is a choice involved in following Jesus. Either we choose to follow Jesus, or we do not. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things. I'm not saying that there is only one way to follow Jesus. I don't think that's true by any means. Some of us will follow Jesus by going out on the road and preaching a revival in every town. Some of us may follow Jesus by withdrawing into a monastery and engaging a life of prayer and contemplation. Many of us will follow Jesus by living our lives the best that we can according to our very best understanding of how God wants us to live. I am also not saying that choosing to follow Jesus means that we don't still make mistakes, that we don't stray from the path, that we don't stray from the way, as Paul called it. Because I think we all know that's not true. And I'll tell you, I'm left with a little discomfort in the way I read the gospel here, that this binary of either you are in or you are out. That's a little discomforting to me, but I can live with that, I can work with that, because I think perhaps the gospel writer is right, that at some foundational level, we either choose to follow Jesus, or we do not. Either we are salt, or we are not. So maybe salt says something about identity. What about light? This is actually the part of the text that gave me the most difficulty, and I struggled with the most. Because I read it and I wanted to say to myself, you know, if we are following Jesus, then by golly, people ought to know about it. If we're following Jesus and nobody has any idea that's what we're doing, are we really doing anything? And as I stand here right now, part of me wants to say, well, that's what I think this gospel means, that this text means. But I don't think that's what the text is saying. When you turn on a light, the light shines, right? It doesn't impose. It won't chase you around the corner. You can close your eyes to it. You can build a wall and you can block it out completely, but the light still shines. The light does not require the receiver to give anything back. It shines on whoever and whatever is around. People can absolutely choose to ignore a light that is shining, but the light still shines. And I believe that when we follow Jesus, people notice. They may not be able to put words to it, they may not be able to put a label on it, but they notice. They may like it, they may be drawn to what they see, they may reject it, they may try to block it out, but they notice. And I don't think that we can determine how we follow Jesus based upon the reactions of others, based upon whether we are getting the response we might like to get. I think we just follow Jesus as best we can. We allow the light to shine. So how do we know if we are salt, if we are light? Is it enough just to proclaim it? In my hypothetical, if I had identified myself as a Christian in my 5th term, would that have been good enough? Did it need to be high? Did I need to do it in the 1st term? Should I have said, hello, my name is Matthew, and I am a Christian? Or maybe even that gets it in the wrong order. Maybe I should have said, hello, I'm a Christian, and my name is Matthew. As I think about this text, and I think about identity, I don't really believe that God is much concerned if I had identified myself as a Christian in my 1st term, or my 10th term, or my 50th term. As someone who seeks to know and to understand and to relate to God through Jesus the Christ, I don't really think that God is much concerned with labels I impose upon myself or what it is I say that I believe. Instead, I think God is interested in something of much greater value. In 1965, thousands of people joined together to march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to protest and to raise awareness of voting rights. Some of those who marched, like Dr. King and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, were Christians. Some of those who marched, like Abraham Hudman and Maurice Davis, were Jewish. Some of the marchers were all mixed up, like Chuck Faith, who was born Catholic, became an atheist, and ended up a Quaker. So among those thousands of marchers, there were categories of all kinds. Categories of creed and color, categories of race and ethnicity, categories of religion and philosophy. Did they all claim to follow Jesus? No. Did they all claim to believe in God? No. Did it matter as they marched from Selma to Montgomery? No. I won't say that I think beliefs are irrelevant, because I think there are dangerous and even evil beliefs that lead people to take harmful and destructive actions. With that said, though, I find myself interested less and less in the labels we use and the things that we say we believe, and I find myself drawn more and more to people that I recognize as following Jesus. And in the same way, I'm beginning to see my identity less and less in a self-imposed label or a statement of belief, and more in the actions that I take. I said earlier that there are many ways to follow Jesus, and you and I, everyone in this room, we are not all going to follow in the same way. We are not all called to follow in the same way. But I think perhaps there is an element of following that is implicit in the very idea. Following requires movement. I cannot follow Jesus if I am standing still. For me, following Jesus requires moving beyond this church. It requires moving beyond my comfort zone. whether that be physical or social or theological. It requires moving into the world. I think we all know that God is in this place. And I am so thankful I can come here each week to be renewed and to reconnect with God, because that renewal and reconnection is vital to me. But Jesus is not calling me to follow him to church. Jesus calls me to follow him from this place into the world, to be with God's people, and to try as best I can to do God's work. And I wonder if perhaps Jesus calls many of you in the same way. I want and I need my identity to be a follower of Jesus the Christ. And so the question I ask myself, and perhaps the question many of you ask as well, am I following